It was P.T. Barnum that said there's no such thing as bad publicity. And for so long, I've kind of believed that. Like when we're trying to cut through in the attention economy, we're trying to create a presence in sharing our music, then you kind of like want to be out there, right? Well, today's guest is Collette Mclafferty, and she's going to share you a story. She's got an amazing background herself. She's a full-time professional singer and musician over a long career. She's an Indie Over 50 artist, but she's had the experience of being signed to a record label and done the gigging, done the touring, the whole journey. But it's her story about being thrust into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons that makes this story really intriguing. But we're going to get an insight into her music, and her journey, including jamming with Jeff Buckley. If that isn't enough for you to hold on to your seats and jump into this interview today with Collette Mclafferty, my pleasure to welcome her today.
You and me equals lunacy to the nth degree when we're together. I can't see a conspiracy is bringing me down.
Welcome, Collette. And where are you in the world today?
So I am in the windy suburbs. That would be the suburbs of Chicago. I guess you could say Chicagoland. And a lot of people who are from the suburbs will just tell you Chicago, but I'm not going to try to pretend like I'm in the actual city. I'm in the southwest suburbs. So the windy suburbs of Chicago. All the fun stuff happens in the city, which I go to the city quite often. But yeah, I'm in a sleepy suburb. No one even, it's called Westchester. Nobody's heard of it. Nobody knows it. That's where I am.
That's great. Well, thank you for joining us today. I know because of the time zones, it's late for you, early for me. But I want to ask you, as I ask all Indie Over 50 artists, who's your favorite artist of the 21st century?
Ooh, so I'm going to say I love Tracy Bonham. I don't know if you are familiar with her. Um, she debuted in the 90s, but her career has sprawled into present day. She had a song called Mother Mother, and she was a part of, when she first debuted, she was a part of that, like the Lilith Fair era and all the, like the grunge 90s rock chicks. And for me, when she went from major label to independent artist, and she just has this beautifully rich catalog. She's a violinist, she's a guitar player. Her songs, I like to think that there's an alternate universe where she's, on the Billboard charts every other week because her songwriting is just, for me, chef's kiss. And a lot of my favorite music of hers came out in the 21st century and not in the 90s. So that's my favorite artist of all time is Tracy Bonham.
Terrific. Thank you. And what I'll do in the links below, I'll have a link to Tracy Bonham as well. So, and the other question I ask is to recall your first purchase in music, whether it was music or a microphone or a guitar. Can you recall the first time you spent your money on music?
Oh yeah. I actually wrote about this. I released a book called Confessions of a Bad Ugly Singer. And I wrote about this chapter. It's a little controversial for how old I was at the time. I was probably too young to actually purchase this album, but I did. It was Prince's 1999 album. It was a double album. I got it at the Hillside Mall, which is a neighboring suburb of Westchester, Illinois. And I remember I got the album. First of all, there's definitely subject matter that I was too young to listen to. But I did it and they sold me the album. So I get the album and you open it up. And on one side, there's a picture of Prince and his band, and they're all in their, their robes and their cravats and their hair, and they're looking fabulous. And then on the other side, there's Prince, like, butt naked on a bed with, like, his butt crack showing and a fog machine, and I was, like, 11 years old, and I remember I was opening up this record in front of my grandmother, and my grandmother played it so cool. I think she knew that if she were to act too shocked, it would almost bring too much attention to it, so it was just so embarrassing. And, it kind of awakened something like I'd never seen, obviously at 11. Hopefully, you're not seeing anyone's butt crack. Um, but it was a very memorable moment, and it's a moment that I'll always cherish. And oh god, I feel so bad for kids who didn't get to go to the mall, and get vinyl for their first purchase. It was
Mm.
such an event.
The event, the
Yeah.
discovery, and you're still in love with the color purple, I should note there as well. A beautiful background and ambiance you have
Oh,
there.
I love it. I was obsessed with, anything and everything Prince from the time I was a child, the Minneapolis sound, all the side projects that Prince did, and, yeah, really shaped, like, who I am and the artist that I would become, and there was just so much inspiration from him specifically and just the universe that he created in music.
So let's talk about yourself and your journey. And we're going to come to the stories that I talked about at the introduction, that we're going to talk about this bad publicity moment, and we'll talk about you jamming with Jeff Buckley.
Oh,
But what's your journey? How did you discover and come into this gift and follow your dream?
so it started with, I was a bullied kid, and I think that that is very common for musicians. But I always found my solace, like when I was singing. I felt better when I was singing. When I turned on my radio, and I would hear Prince and Michael Jackson and Madonna, and thought that they were actually living inside the radio and that they were my friends. And then as I got older. I really did. I was like, "How are they inside this?" I was so young. Um, as I got older, I learned like, "Oh, wait, no, these are real people. Like they go to the studio and, they create these music videos." I remember the birth of MTV. Like I was around for when MTV started. So all of a sudden it went from the radio to I went to a friend's house who had cable. So they were rich, and I'm like, "What is this?" And it was MTV, and I remember it was the song Rush, Tom Sawyer. They would just
Mm.
play that over and over again. That was one of their most popular songs at the time. I was just like, "What is this? This is so cool." And from there, any opportunity that I could sing, I didn't really have much of a plan, but I would just, I'd audition for the school play or I'd do community theater. I'd get the paper, like, what can I audition for? And, I'm so glad that I did not have showbiz parents. They had no idea how to get me into showbiz, which now I'm like, that is a good thing. Um, but any opportunity that I could get to perform, I remember going with the chorus to the senior centers and singing for the seniors. We were singing like Christmas carols and stuff. And I just knew, like, this is what I wanna do, this is it, so any opportunity that I could get that was, age appropriate, I would just go for it.
And so this is your mid-teens, is it? And you're coming through into your higher school years, is that the case?
Yeah, and then, it's funny, when I was a freshman, I auditioned for the Chicago Academy for the Performing Arts, which is like a performing arts school.
Mm.
Um, I remember I auditioned for the acting department, and honestly, I'm not that great of an actress, so I didn't get in. But then my friend got in, like, as I was about to go into my senior year, and she's like, "Why don't you audition again?" And I was like, "You know what? Let me audition for the music department this time." And I did, and I got in, and it was wild. We sang everywhere. We sang all over the city of Chicago. We sang at the Daily Center. We were on, sometimes we were on the news. I remember I sang for Kid and Play came to our school to like, talk about show business. And we got
Mm.
like me and four other girls, we got to sing the Star Spangled Banner to Kid and Play. And it was, and we were treated like professionals, we were just always playing these events and I it was like I was bitten by the bug and I wanted more. And then from there, I went to the American Musical Dramatic Academy in New York and I kind of just step by step, I wanted to be a Broadway singer. Once I got to New York, I realized that I didn't have that discipline to get up and audition. And I'm not gonna lie, I was also partying quite a bit because I was like 19, 20 years old and in New York City. So I got a guitar and I started writing songs and my other friends who were like the musical theater misfits, like we started writing songs and eventually that led to open mics and then it led to gigs and then it led to my first band, Edible Red. And, like, we would have played the opening of an envelope. Like, we played, like, every gig you could imagine. We had a gig at Rikers Island. We played for some of the prisoners. So it was like if somebody had a gig and wanted a band, we would just go. We just were like, "Okay," and eventually we were supposed to break up. It was going to be our last gig, and we got signed. We got offered a record deal at our last gig. So then the band went on a few more years, and that was with Select Records. It's a wild, wild existence.
One of the things I often talk about
Mhm.
with indie over 50 artists is what were you doing with your career before you got into music? And here you are, your career is music, and here you are, a recording contract.
So Sugar and Spring was our first single, and then our second single was our cover of Hey Ya. And I would say that was the one where we got, on paper, that was our most successful. In front of the scenes, behind the scenes, it was kind of a dumpster fire. But we got a pretty decent taste of success, I would say. And I'm grateful that I got to experience it.
And during this period, so what did that look like, that success? Were you touring? Were you on TV? Were you being played on the radio? What did that success look like and feel like for you?
So it definitely wasn't glamorous, but I was paying my rent. I was feeding myself. Um, We got to the point we would play regionally a lot, like, we would play colleges in our and sometimes we did go to the Midwest sometimes, but we did the college scene a lot, like, on the East Coast, and then we also did this thing where we would just go to Holland and tour, like, mostly in Amsterdam, so, like, we just set up a bunch of gigs there. um, it was like the internet was so new at the time. Um, so we were, I remember I found a publicist on Twitter who hooked us up with a bunch of radio shows in Holland. Um, so we weren't rich, I'll tell you that. Um, but we did make money, and it did open up the door for me as a session singer. I think what was challenging though is that we also did it just as file sharing started and CD and record sales had kinda started plummeting. And then there was also a cultural shift where when we first started, it was all about the girl power, the Lilith Fair, every record label was, like, looking for the next Alanis Morissette, which was good for us, right? But then by the time we were really ready to do it, all of a sudden it switched to teen pop where you weren't even allowed to be over the age of 20, and, we didn't have all the indie tools that we have today. Now you could be 100 years old and if you're a good musician, you can make a record, someone's gonna appreciate it. No one's gonna tell you that you're not allowed to do it. But I was getting to the age where I think the first time someone told me I was too old, I was 27. I was
Wow.
27. Like, that's me. So it was during a really interesting cultural shift. So it was it did get a little bit harder, even though sometimes on paper we were getting more and more successful, but behind the scenes, it was getting kind of harder and harder in other ways.
And what did that mean for the journey for Edible Red? Like, you got signed as you were about to split up, and then you got this signed success, tours. What was the journey destination then for Edible Red?
Sure. Well, I'm not going to try to pretend like we were on these huge tours. Like we were booking them ourselves. So we had like no tour support. But we were pretty good at finding places that would pay
Yeah.
us. Um, so and the college money was decent. Um, we were getting our name out there, so we were able to kind of get our name out there through the internet, but also I would do this thing where I would look for TV shows that we could go on, and I'd get us on all these random shows. Like I got us on Cash Cab. I got us on a show called the Dr. Keith Abloh Show. Um, we were on another show called A Makeover Story. So I would find ways to get publicity for the band. But then we were going through this thing where rock radio stopped playing women for a while. And that was like right as our album came out. Um, so there were times where it was difficult to break through, to like get past that regional, that we were national on some levels, we were international on some levels. Like we were featured on MTV Buzzworthy, MTV Latino played Sugar and Spring for like a week, so we did get to do some cool stuff. Um, but it was at a time it became more and more and more of a grind. And then the ageism thing that I was starting to experience just as we were debuting, it really it got to me behind the scenes. And I kept lying about my age. I could never keep straight, like, I would be like, "Oh, I'm 25," and I could never keep straight, like, what age I told someone that I was. Um, and then also our cellist, Dave Eggar, he was blowing up as a session player, so he did the intro on Coldplay's, Viva La Vida, and so sometimes we couldn't even get him on the gig because it's like, "Okay, are you gonna play Bon Jovi's show, or are you gonna come play with us at the bitter end on a Wednesday?" Like, it's a no-brainer, of course he's gonna go to Bon Jovi's house. So it was just and like the rest of the band, people were growing up, they were getting, corporate job offers, getting married, having kids, so, I didn't really grow up the same way that they did, so it was like, we had some of the success on paper, we got to hit some milestones, but it got to a point where it was too hard, so there is a point where it was just really hard, you gotta walk away, so that point did come.
That point did come, and then clearly, and that was a really interesting, evolution, as I say, from almost splitting up, being signed, going through that journey, but it did find its natural course in the context of that
Yes.
social and industry change, which was really, really interesting, and the emergence of ageism. Yeah, really crazy to hear about
Mhm.
27. So totally get that, and totally resonant, I think, for Indie Over 50, where part of it is the joy of, as you say, the liberty of producing music, sharing music, engaging, listening, and discovering new music, beyond the age of 50. So, this theme is really, really powerful and helpful, I think, for, Indie Over 50 community.
Thank
So, what happens next?
Okay, so I remember I I actually had to be the one to step down from the band because everybody was kind of willing to keep like one foot in, one foot out. And I remember it was the right thing to do though. Um I had there were times the press has always been a little mean to me, to be honest. Like there's always been someone in the press that's been a little snarky with me. And I remember my songwriting was ripped apart. It was the All Music Guide. They said that my lyrics were dumb and embarrassing. And like that went out to so many media outlets. And my skin could only be thick for so long. So
Mm.
I decided, like, I'm not going to do this artist thing. I was 30, I was around 30, 31, maybe 32 when the band broke up. At this time, I had been told that I was too old to be an artist anymore. And people were telling me this repeatedly, which is insane. But back then, I took it to heart. So I decided that I was just going to, yeah, because it's the one thing I can't change. I can't magically change my age. So I decided, you know what? I'm just going to be a session singer. I'm just going to do the for hire thing. This is going to be my job. And there was like this magic age of session work on Craigslist at the time where you could just go in the talent gig section. And it was before we had Sound Better and all these sites. So I was booking session work like crazy. I would just go from one session to the other. I didn't have to like wear, my label wanted me to wear a push-up bra and all that. I didn't have to do any of that, right? So I could just go to the studio, sing other people's songs, get paid. And again, I wasn't rich, but I was doing all right. I was paying my rent, eating 3 square meals a day. Um had enough money to live a comfortable life, and that was my existence for a while until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't. Is this the beginning of our
Yeah.
story? I'll hand
Yes.
it to you to
Wow.
explain the circumstance and why and how we got there.
Okay. So, if people are telling me that at 27, I'm not allowed to have a career in music, they certainly didn't want me to have a career in music when I hit 40. So I'd hit 40. I was still living very comfortably off of studio work, but I hadn't really performed on stage very much. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I could find like a cover band or a tribute band and I could go work, in a tribute band just to like get on stage again and just keep doing what I'm doing in the studio. And I get a call asking if I would sing in this pink cover band. And I was like, oh, yeah, absolutely. And the guy, his name's Rick, he was a bass player. He said, "Oh, great, I showed your videos to my partner Chuck right away. This is gonna be awesome." Little time goes by, I don't hear anything. Then I hear that Chuck is no longer in the band, and so much time had passed that I had kinda moved on from the idea. What I did not know was that Chuck was a personal injury attorney who had a bad falling out with Rick, over something that had nothing to do with the band. That broke them up. There was now 2, pink cover bands that were competing with each other. I had no idea. And Chuck sued Rick for $10 million and dragged me into the lawsuit. So I got served with a 112-page complaint. I had never met Chuck. Apparently, Chuck didn't think very highly of me, and he let me know this in the 112-page complaint. There was a couple of pages dedicated to how much he didn't like me. He said that I was a lousy singer and that I wasn't attractive enough to portray Pink. Um, to this day, I cannot believe that this was an illegal document. And at one point, I found out that I could be in the legal system for a few years. And I remember it got to the point where I had already racked up like 3 grand trying to defend myself against this person who I'd never met. And I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna go to the press." So I started reaching out to different people in the press, and unfortunately, the New York Post picked up the phone when I called. I didn't really wanna go to the New York Post because I knew that whatever they reported would be a little bit kinda trashy, but I knew that this case had to be in the media because the fact that this lawyer was even able to sue me and put me through this in the first place needed to be known. And it was my one line of defense to get out of the case. So I talked to this reporter. Her name was Leah Ustowicz. I talked to her for like 3 days. And we were talking about everything in the case that actually mattered. The real case was between the two men, and you could tell that I just got dragged into it. But then she said, "How did you feel when he called you unattractive?" And I said, "Well, I don't like it, but it's not that important, so we shouldn't focus on that." But then she kept asking me about it, asking me about it. And then I open up the paper like the next day. There's a picture of me and a picture of Pink with the headline, "Singer sued for being too old and too ugly for Pink cover band." So even though my age was not a talking point, the New York Post decided that it should be a talking point. Like the age thing, they made that up. And that went viral. So now for like 3 days it's going viral. It's in Time Magazine, uh, FindLaw.com, it's in Yahoo News, CBS Radio. Like there were people that were just like driving and heard it while they were listening to the radio that called me. And they're all repeating this story was that I was so old and I was so ugly and I was such a terrible singer that it prompted this man to sue, which was not what really happened at all. It was a lie, and it was a lie that was put on several news stations and media outlets. And then they made a big deal.
Yeah, two things about that. I can't understand why he sued you as opposed to his partner, or were both being sued at the same time.
We were, so there were 3 of us that were being sued at the same time, and it was the majority of the case was focused on his partner, but then there were 13 allegations against me specifically and another band member. And what I've learned, because I have now been in the legal world a lot, which is not what I had on my bingo card. Something that I learned is that oftentimes people will drag in innocent parties just to kind of stick it to the main person more. So I believe that's what was done because there were just a lot of things about me in the lawsuit that weren't true either.
So it was almost like a legal tactic. And in Australia, laws are very different, but I would use the word vexatious complaint. I don't know if that term resonates or means anything for you there.
100%. The courts, uh, first of all, the courts did not do enough. Um, we did get a hearing to talk about his conduct as a lawyer. The courts never ruled it a vexatious complaint. They should have, but they didn't. And so, yeah, there's so many components of the legal system in the United States that are a joke. And unfortunately, my case speaks to that. But going through the lawsuit and then all the media saying that it was because I was too old and ugly, it really messed with my head psychologically. Things got to some very dark places for a while. And then all of a sudden, my phone's not ringing anymore. And what was interesting, I would say that like my session singing career, I probably lost about like maybe 90% of my work. I still worked here and there. Um, but there was a massive downturn in session work for me. And Some of it was because now they knew my age. One person told me that I should have sued because the New York Post printed my age. And I said, "Well, no, there's nothing wrong with my age. Like, there's literally nothing wrong with it." Um, but yeah, there was a hard chapter. It took a while to bounce back from that.
This is such a problematic case on so many levels. But for you personally, having sought from a career perspective, publicity, exposure, opportunity, here you are thrust in the worst imaginable publicity. You know, remember P.T. Barnum said there's no such thing as bad publicity. Well, you might have a view on that
No, true.
because this is branding you
Mhm,
old, ugly, can't sing, horrible headline, and it's having
mhm.
a career impact on you. But the mental health burden, I cannot imagine for a moment stepping in your shoes at that period of time.
I wish I could go back to, like, 40-year-old me and, like, give 40-year-old me a hug. Like, I remember the day I saw your playlist when I discovered Indie Over 50 for the first time. I was like, "Oh my god, where I wish I had this 10 years ago." It was so exciting to see that. Um, yeah, the mental health journey, and I remember having a few months where I could not feel a thing. I could not feel any emotions. Everything just kind of seemed very gray and very beige, and I believe that that's kind of the brain's way of protecting itself. And then it really took me several years to process everything that happened. And it also took me a while to process, like, as awful as it was, I now know that it's not something that I should take personally because the media does this. The media loves to do this to women specifically. We love, New York Post had a policy of really age shaming anyone over 35. It was just the way they operated. It wasn't specific to me. It's the way that they treated a lot of women in that paper, or even just performers in general, if they were over 35. They love to, throw the old tag. Um, the man that sued me didn't know me, so even though I hate what he did, it I it took me many, many years to realize, hey, out of everyone who participated in this, well, one, none of this is my fault because I didn't do anything wrong. I'm really the only person who should not be embarrassed. The New York Post should be embarrassed for their reporting. The man that sued me should be embarrassed that he sued me. The Supreme Court of Riverhead should feel embarrassed that this case was in their court system for 2 years. I shouldn't be embarrassed because I didn't do anything wrong. And, when I was 41, I got this tattoo. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a Jeff Buckley lyric, and it says, "Feel no shame for what you are," and then 41, which was my age at the time. So it was at that time when I decided that I was no longer tolerating age shaming of any sort. I was no longer tolerating ageism. And it took a while to get there. Um, because I did buy into ageism at times prior to having this event, but the end result was that I came into a lot of self-acceptance. And now I love telling people how I'm 51. I tell the world, I work it into conversation. I love being 51. And when I was getting told, when I was 27 and 35 that I was too old back then, I did have those insecurities. And now at 51, I don't because, I've been through it. I've survived it. And ageism, it's not my problem. It's whoever's ageist, it's their problem, but it's not mine. And I'm hoping that any artist come to that conclusion.
I think uh, just an extraordinary, insightful response from you. And it feels like to come to that place of acceptance about yourself, about, no, but I didn't do anything wrong. The perspective that you've been able to
Mhm.
share and the context you've been able to frame this in, that to me reflects an extraordinary personal journey. And therapy, whatever the case might be. I guess my question for you, what was your support team to get you through that? You know, because either you could have been doing this all on your own, it could have been family and
Mhm.
friends, it could be partners, community. How did you have the strength to navigate to that place?
I was lucky, I had a lot of support. I remember when that story went viral, I had so many people calling me, reaching out to me. Even people who bullied me in grade school, like, reached out and, like, donated to my legal fees. Um, I had some really good roommates at the time, and, it's funny, I had a room that I would Airbnb, and so I would have all these guests from all over the world stay in my apartment at different times, and the first thing I would do is tell them the story. So I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm fighting a $10 million lawsuit right now." And one of the saving graces of that period of time was that anybody could hear my story at least once and be really fascinated, like, "How are you going through this? Are you okay?" So I did get a lot of support from strangers, and I was also because I was living in New York, anytime that I was just not I went to a lot of bars, and I told my story to a lot of daytime bartenders, so I got support that way too. I would just anytime I met someone for years, I would just tell them that story right away because it took me years to process. So, I was very lucky that I a lot of people were sympathetic and wanted to hear more, and so did and also writing the book helped a lot.
Thanks for sharing that. Mm. If I think about, well, that's just wonderful, just a fantastic that you were able to draw the strength from that community of support. The outcomes, you've come to a successful place. There's 2 other outcomes I'm interested in here. One is financially and legal fees. Did you win? Did you lose? What was the outcome from the case point of view? And the second one is, what was the outcome? Because I understand from my research that you've been active in advocating for change, so, and making representation to legislators and lawmakers. So tell us about the outcomes from the actual case point of view. Was it ever thrown out, or did you have to stump up the 10 million? And then what your role has been in advocating for change.
So, I knew from day 1 that I was going to make him pay for my legal fees, and I was there were times where he could have just dropped the case, but he didn't, and he really should have. Um, I was ready to do whatever it took to make sure that a judge read this case, and so it took about 2 years. It took me around 2 years to get the case thrown out, which is insane. Um, and then we had a hearing that would discuss his conduct as a lawyer. And so the judge was really pressuring me to settle. And so we did settle, but I still did take the stand. Um, what I settled for was my legal fees back and a public apology because we could have taken it to trial. I would have loved to have taken it to trial. It would have been a great, like, probably the most interesting trial ever. Um, and it would have been such an open shut case. But the public apology meant a lot to me, and I never got it. So I got the legal fees back. I got a private apology. And at that time, when I met him for the first time at that hearing. So the case had been in litigation for 2 years, and I'd never met him. So I guess you could say that technically I was the winner there, but I had to come up with about 15 grand in legal fees. So I got back. there was a small portion, I think it was like $3,500 that I raised online. I got everything else back from Chuck, the guy that sued me. Now, as far as legislation, um, the legislation didn't pass, but I'm still very, very proud of the fact that it was introduced on the Senate floor in New York. It was introduced on the Assembly floor in New York. I do like to think that maybe we loosened up the pickle jar for other legislation to pass. We got the awareness. I always felt that the awareness of the case was important because I had people telling me, "Oh, make sure you don't talk about this publicly." I'm like, "Of course I'm gonna talk about this publicly. You shouldn't be able to do this to somebody." Um, and also because Chuck never wanted to actually, fairly compensate me for what I went through. So then my lawyer told him, and he was a lawyer, by the way, representing himself, Chuck was, so he didn't really have legal fees. My lawyer said, "She's gonna talk about it whenever she wants." And I knew I was gonna write a book. Um, so even though the legislation didn't pass, I was so proud to get it to that point. And then also, something that makes me really happy is that there are times where there are members of the legal world who talk about my case as like, "Hey, this is why we need to restore decency to the courtroom." My lawyer gives talks on it. I recently worked with, it's like a legal school for civilians who aren't trying to get a degree but want to understand the legal system better. It's called Legal Labyrinth. So I recently talked to them about my situation, and I'm going to be doing another version of the book, like a second edition. So at least the story lives on. Um, I also want other people who might find themselves in a frivolous lawsuit. The reason I want my story out there so they can maybe draw some strength from what I've been through and figure out how they're going to go forward. I think that until the legal system changes and you can't do this to people anymore, that it is a case. It's lived on. There's law students that learn about my case every once in a while. I get an email, and that makes me feel good that it's held up as a textbook example of what not to do in the legal system. And even if I didn't get the legislation passed, that feels good.
Wow. You did amazingly well, and to create the foundations for movement, for change. I think that's really, really inspiring, Colette. I know that I understand that the first edition of the book has sold out. I've just heard there that you're considering a reissue. We'll have links below that people can find out any more information if they like in the future. I think I heard that you might have optioned the
Amazing.
film rights.
So, okay, what happened is that I did I did option the film rights, to a friend who is an indie filmmaker. Um, it wasn't like a whole lot of money, but it did help me get through that period of time, and the film rights reverted back to me because he had, like, 3 years to at least start ma and he had an idea for it, but he never got around to making it, so, the f I have the film rights. They reverted back to me as well as the rights to the book, so if anyone maybe I'll make a movie. Why not?
You never know. So, along this journey, you shared the tattoo and Jeff Buckley's line from a song
Yes.
and the strength that you were able to draw from it. So tell us about the Jeff Buckley story.
So, I remember I came home from work. This was back in the midnight. It was very close to his actual death, like about maybe a year prior. And I didn't quite know who Jeff Buckley was at that time. And I remember my ex-boyfriend. So my ex-boyfriend used to go to this strip club called Billy's Topless. It was very popular. Like Guys would go there, girls would go there. And so he was at Billy's Topless. I was young and very liberal back then. I was like, yeah, sure, go. Um, and he's like, oh, Jeff Buckley was there and he wants to smoke some weed. And I guess his friend said, yeah, come to my house and, we'll smoke some weed, but the friend didn't have any weed. So my ex-boyfriend at the time, he was going to be the one to provide the weed. And I was initially very tired and I didn't really feel like going out, but he's like, Jeff Buckley's going to be there. He's this famous folk singer. And I was like, okay. So we go over there and it was, it was me, my ex-boyfriend, his friend, Jeff Buckley, who I didn't realize that it was Jeff Buckley, and then one of the dancers. So in my mind, I'm thinking famous folk singer, he's going to have a big bushy beard and gray hair. And there was nobody by that description there, right? There was this young, scrappy kid who was Jeff Buckley. And we spent the night probably till like 6 in the morning, just playing songs, singing. And at that time, I think I had only done 1 or 2 gigs. I had not really, and I only had a couple of songs. I had not really played my music for people on a big scale. So I whip out this song and it's called Do What You Gotta Do. It's like the same 3 chords over and over again. And I'm singing it. And Jeff, and I don't realize that it's Jeff. I just think he's this scrappy Lower East Side kid who I'm smoking pot with. um, he picks up this guitar and the guitar has 4 strings and he starts playing bass while I'm playing Do What You Gotta Do. And all of a sudden he's singing with me. He's singing the lyrics and the words. He's like, do what you gotta do, what you gotta do, what you gotta do. And I'm playing with him. I'm like, oh my God, this feels amazing. Still not realizing that I'm playing with Jeff Buckley. And he gave me this huge hug. He's like, I never want to forget that song. And that's when I realized, like, oh, I want to be in a band. I want to play with other musicians. And then the next day, I asked my boyfriend at the time, I said, oh, who was that guy that I played guitar with? He was awesome. And he was like, that was Jeff Buckley. And I was like, what? Like, I think it was him. I thought Jeff Buckley never showed up. And it was, yeah, it was just like a small handful of us singing and playing music together all night. And I never saw him again. I was supposed to go to a show. I didn't go. I thought I'll catch the next one. And then he passed.
Ah, look, that's just an amazing, again, reflection. And I think it's this year. There's a new musical that's just come out about his life.
Yes, I think it's a film. Even if that had not been Jeff Buckley,
Mm.
that was still such a meaningful moment in my life. I think it was the first time I'd ever played guitar with, another musician playing at the same time and like singing my lyrics with me.
And your original song, which is brings us to another chapter now of you as an Indie Over 50 artist releasing your own original new music. And the most recent is Lunacy. And we'll put the link below, and it's available on Spotify and YouTube and all those good things. So tell us about your
Thank you.
role as an artist today.
Sure. Well, it took a little while. It took several years just for me to fall in love with music again. So I had to allow myself that time to take space. And I also recorded a lot of stuff over the years that never got released. So Lunacy is actually from the lawsuit era is when I recorded it. And I'm very proud of it because it was the first time that I was really producing. I was calling up the session players. I had some of my friends on it. So I had Dave Eggar, the cellist from Edible Red, played on it. I had Muzz Skillings from, formerly of Living Color, did the bass line on it. Went to a really cool studio called Pancake Studios. And it was great because I it was so great just, like, kinda calling the shots on everything, where in the past, I was doing a lot of collaborating with band members and labels, which is great too. But just being in charge of it, paying for it, owning it, which was but it did stay on my hard drive for an embarrassingly long time, probably close to, like, oh my god, close to a decade maybe. In my mind, I always wanted to remix it, and maybe one day I will remix it, but finally I was like, "No, just put it out." Um, so I'm in that process. I have a lot of stuff that never got released. It's in various hard drives and sitting on Google Drives and stuff like that. So I felt like it was time to circle back, come full circle. I'm 51. Nobody can stop me from putting out an album because we have, YouTube and Spotify and Deezer and all these places keep popping up. There's no, like, you can't stop someone from releasing music because they're older. And you can, like, have you ever, what I would want to ask to anyone who thinks that there's an age limit on this. When was the last time that you heard a song that you really loved for the first time? Did you say to yourself, "Oh, I wonder how old they are because if they're over 35, I can't like them." Like, I don't think anyone like that. No.
Touche.
So, and it was a process. It was definitely a process to get there. Um, but we're only getting better as we age, so why would we not make music to reflect that? You know?
I love that. Fine wine. What advice would you have for indie over 50 artists?
So I think at this point, do it at a pace that's fun, that's pleasurable. One thing that I remember a publicist told me, they said, if you're stressing out over your music release, you're missing the whole point. If you're not having fun, you're missing the whole point. Work at a pace that makes sense for you. I don't release super often. I'm not trying to pump out a song a month. Right now, that doesn't feel good for me. It kind of feels good to like put out a song, let it marinate. Once I'm ready, I'll put out another one. So it's got to be fun. It's got to be pleasurable. Anyone that tells you that you cannot do it because you're over 50, like, bye. Just I would limit time. I would put no stock in their opinion whatsoever. And it's and also the over 50 community is really growing. There's so many of us out there, and the fact that, like, we're meeting each other and, having conversations and showing up to, album releases on Bandcamp, and that's exciting. And I think it's in its infancy, and it'll be really exciting just to see how it grows over the years, you know?
Yeah, well, firstly, great advice. Just I love that pace, joy, and reconnecting with the joy of the process rather than the stress of the process. Really, really great advice for indie over 50 artists. And you're right. I think that what I've loved about this whole process is the meeting, the communication, the collaboration. As a result of all this adventure, I'm now working with a producer in Japan, and just had a demo come in overnight from an amazing singer in Scotland. Just all these people I'm meeting and engaging with is just extraordinary. I'm loving it, finding it very joyful. So I think I really appreciate your support. Now, on that, do you have any other favorite indie over 50 artists?
Yeah, I actually want to give a couple shout outs. Well, on the Indie Over 50 playlist, I really like Rita de Los Angeles. She's super cool. Really cool. Yeah, so she has her guitar in her, Spotify canvas, and she's kinda stepping side to side with the guitar.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I just found her super fun, loved her voice, I just loved her whole vibe. So I just wanna shout her out. And I also wanna give a special shout out to there's an artist named Dina Finay. She lives in New York City. And she helped me so much when I was kinda coming up in the scene. She ran an open mic in New York City, just so supportive. I grew so much as a songwriter from attending her events. Um, and she would also like, whenever I would like if I would, like, lose a waitressing job, she'd, like, make a phone call, and all of a sudden I'd be interviewing for another one. And, I also got one of my first like really, really big gigs, singing on a Barbie commercial from her. She's an independent artist and producer. She showed me, back then that women can also be producers. And she has a bunch of albums on her page, and she's someone that I admire. Now she has like huge stage shows of, dancers performing to her music. And I watched her grow it from like, "Hey, I'm at an open mic, I'm making an album," and she's really just been putting out lots of music over the years and just a fantastic voice. So that's someone that I wanna shout out.
What a great, introduction to the music of Dina, and we'll have her, links there below.
And I also wanna give a shout out to DJ Disciple. He's a house music artist. He has his own record label. It's called Catch 22 Records. He has been a DJ, a house music DJ for about 40 years. He put out a book called The Beat, the Scene, the Sound. Um, and he's someone that really just did it for himself, and just kind of put one foot in front of the other and created like his catalog is tremendous. But that's also someone that I really look up to as an indie artist.
Thank you so much, Colette. That's just wonderful and generous of you to share us your story, your insights and reflections, and as well some great recommendations about new music we could discover as well in the Indie Over 50 community, and as well as your favorite artists from the 21st century, I should say. Look, on that note, Colette, I really want to thank you. You've been very, very generous
Thank
in
you.
sharing your story. It is really inspiring of what you've gone through, what you've shared, and how you've moved the needle for the opportunity for others. So, with that, I'll say thank you very much and all the best there.
Thank you. And thank you for having this community. Um, because I think of talented artists over the age of 50 who might be Googling, "I'm an indie artist over 50," right? And they find your YouTube channel, and your podcast, and they get to connect with other people. So I think that indie over 50, it's something that's needed. We need this. So thank you for creating it.
Thank you so much, Colette.